Could you tell us a little bit about where you first heard about the peace encampment?
Well, I was a very active member of NOW, and I knew some other peace activists, and we heard about the encampment, and we decided to form an affinity group. Okay, and we call the affinity group Sorrow Mundi, Sisters of the World. There were some beautiful, beautiful women in it, and we sort of practiced how we would act in times of if we would decided to do civil disobedience and what our roles would be. We had at the time some elderly women who could not climb fences and do things like that, and they would be support. And some of us would make the decision at the time whether or not we would go over the fence, whether or not we would risk arrest, etc. So we heard about it and we formed an affinity group to go up to Seneca Falls.
So had you had like civil disobedience training?
Yes. Sure, Quakers gave it, and we did. We had some civil disobedience training that way.
So you had some idea about dealing with what might happen. And when you went to Seneca Falls, did you go directly to the camp, or did you go to like the women's museum or historic?
Well, that's sort of all mushed up in my mind. We were at Seneca Falls several times. But what I remember doing was I had been at a writer's workshop, the Women's Writing Guild in Saratoga, and I came across to Seneca Falls, and we camped out in a state park there. And that was a horrendous, horrendous experience. And I met the rest of the sisters from Soromundi at the state park. That's where we had decided to meet, because the night before the action was to take place, the military had their helicopters coming over, and they were deliberately loud. They had no mufflers, and they kept droning and droning all night, and the sound was just frightening, frightening. But we were camped out in the state park.
So was this for the August 1st action?
Right. I had been at the camp another time, but this was for the August 1st action. And I remember in the morning, Bella Abzug was there. And I remember she had 2 canes, and she gathered us up, and I guess we had a little rally, and I don't remember how far she walked, but I remember we walked for a while. And then as we approached the army base, the depot, she led us single file, holding hands like this, through quite a crew of not so local people that had been brought in to confront us. They were not all local people, but that was a little bit frightening, because it was like doing a gauntlet, and there was lots of shouting and almost, I don't remember being spit at, but just about. And we got to the fence, and it seemed we were there for hours, and we thought we had an agreement that if we came and tied something to the fence and stood by the fence, then we would get arrested. That's what we thought the agreement was, but evidently not. They let us tie things to the fence, ribbons and banners and things, and wait patiently and wait for hours, and nothing happened, except from the time I had been before, they had put razor wire all along the tops. This looping of razor wires. They had guardhouses every so often, and there were soldiers in full battle gear. It was for what, 200 women, a little more than 200 maybe, that were coming to protest, because we knew that there were nuclear weapons there, even though they swore up and down that there weren't. And we knew too that it wasn't secure, because the women at the encampment had been able to get in, and they had painted the water tower and put flowers and put even mock graves inside the army depot, and so it wasn't secure at all. And we knew that they were, as always, lying to us, and that there were nuclear weapons there. So there we were at the fence. And finally, a wonderful peace activist that was sort of the leader of Soromundi. She now lives at the Catholic Worker House in Washington, D.C. She said, all right, then we have to take the next step. So we caucused, and we decided that one woman would be support, and that those of us that were ready would start to climb the fence. Well, other women had started that, and it was very rough. They climbed the fence, and they were pulled down by some of the soldiers, and I remember some women face down on the ground, face down with their handcuffed back of them, being handled very, very roughly. And that was made us take a deep breath. And then there was a group of women who did the going over the fence like a very slow motion choreography. It was just beautiful. It was a dance. And they just did it. One stood on the other one's shoulders and just slowly went over the fence and put out her hand to the soldier, and the soldier instinctively put up his hand and sort of caught her. Okay? This was very different. So it seemed that the people around there, the soldiers, saw that this was a symbolic protest, that they were not in any physical danger. This beautiful piece of theater, that it was a piece of dance. And so then our leader went over the fence first, and then another young woman went over, and she said, I have a fused spine. You are going to help me over the fence, and then you're going to catch me and be very careful that I don't fall. And she went over the fence, and sure enough, there was her soldier going, and he caught her, and after that it was my turn. Now I went over, but I didn't have too much experience with razor wire, so I put my hand on the razor wire, and I cut my palm a little, and then I went down over, and I had a big black soldier was mine, and I think his name was Peebles. And you get your picture taken with your soldier. And the rest of the women were on the bus. But I had to go to the infirmary. So they took me on another bus and bandaged me up at the infirmary. And then when I was going back to join the others in the pens, and there were pens, enclosed pens, pens that were out in the open. I think pens that could have held 4,000 or 5,000 people. They were all there, and they were all ready. And I must say, on the way back to, I was on the bus with Grace Paley, and that was such an honor. Then I knew I was in the right place, because there she was. So then we were back in the pen, and it was enclosed, and I found my Soromundi, my small group, and there were groups all over, and there were many affinity groups there, and they were deciding what they were going to do. There were some women that were going to resist arrest. They were going to resist, well, we were already arrested. They were going to resist being, their photographs being taken, etc. They were going to resist. Our group decided, no, we would go limp, we would not resist, but we would each say that our birth date was August 6th, 1945. Okay? And it was getting hot, and we were getting low, getting to feel low because nothing was moving. We expected efficiency, at the very least, but no, we didn't get that. And then one young woman from Soromundi has a beautiful voice, and she started to sing. And I guess it was the good old songs, We Shall Overcome, Standing by the River, and all those songs. And she just stood up against the pole. This was the same young woman whose spine was fused, so she was in considerable pain, but she sang through the pain, and she sang us through the blues. She sang us through all the depression, and it was just, and of course we joined in, and that seemed to start them moving. All of a sudden we were taken to the place where you were photographed. And you got your full frontal photograph, and then you got your turn, and then you got your letter of a ban and bar, I think it was called. And that meant that you could not return to the Army base for 6 months, a year, forever, I don't know. And we returned for that, and then again we were kept in another kind of pen for a while. And then they had an idea, which was very unusual. There were many exits to this army depot. I mean, it was miles and miles in circumference. And their idea was to wait until dark and let us out and hope. This is our presumption was that they were hoping that the locals, quote unquote, who weren't so local, maybe even hired, that they would come to those exits and harass us, and that we would be left alone in this vast countryside. And so sure enough, it was after dark, and we were let out, heaven knows where, at one of the gates. And I remember standing in the dark singing. And sure enough, a van from the women's encampment came around and picked us up. They weren't to be outsmarted. They knew what they were doing, and they were circling the whole place, continuously, so that none of us were left alone, and it was wonderful. Oh, and then, of course, we went back to the encampment. But that wasn't the only time I was at the encampment. I was there a couple of days before, and I had some wonderful impressions of the encampment.
Tell us about those.
First of all, there was an energy. It was just as if everybody had been liberated from whatever restraints, and there was such joy. There was just joy. I remember there was a lot of toplessness going on, and that was just fine. And I remember, as I was saying the other day, I remember women with beards and mustaches, and they had let them grow, and they were just fine. It was just all fine. And we saw the gardens where they were planting things and trying all kinds of things. And I remember there was a room, like a telecommunications room, only it wasn't, cell phones didn't exist, computers really didn't exist much then. And I sort of remember being asked to do that, to be in that room. And I think it was during the Waterloo time. I'm not sure, but there were people marching, I know, and we were trying to get the information and coordinate things, and somehow we did it. Somehow we all did it. There were runners that came back. There were people in cars and payphones, good old payphones at the time, and much less sophisticated than now, but we kept in communication, and that was part of the joy of it all. And there were campfires, I remember, at night, and singing. I guess I remember the singing most of all. It was just wonderful.
Do you remember any specific songs that were sung?
No, they were all the protest songs, Pete Seeger's and Phil Oakes and all of them. We were singing all of them. That was a lovely thing. And then the communal meals were also beautiful. I think, could we have had succotash? Something like with corn and beans and things, and it all tasted so wonderfully good. It was a wonderful, freeing time.
Do you remember any of the meetings, dinner time meetings?
Yeah. And they were, it's very interesting because I belong to Code Pink now, and we have a house in Washington, D.C., and some of the same rules, quote unquote, seem to apply.
Oh, tell us about that.
Okay. Well, they do harken back to what at that time was consciousness raising. There were certain rules. You did not interrupt. There was a kind of a talking stick that went around. You did not give advice. You did not interrupt. You did not bring negativity to the table. You kept things positive. If you committed to something, you committed to it all the way. You did not do a half a task. And you always, I remember there was always something about if you left the encampment, you went with a buddy, you went with someone, you did not go alone, etc. There were several scares. I remember that those hired folks they tried to break into the encampment. Once in a while, I guess they got pretty close or in there, and women sort of used like a living fence. They were not. They didn't. They weren't combative, but we kept them out. We kept them out, and some of that was frightening in the beginning. There was a lot of yelling and those cars roaring by them. The mufflers, again, they knew how to keep those mufflers raw so that those sounds were supposed to really frighten you, But there was this solidarity there that all of a sudden you knew it was going to be all right, that, we had the right on our side and the left. And that it was going to be okay. It was going to be okay, and it was.
So had you worked with consensus before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Our Sorrow Mundi, we worked with consensus, and our peace groups at the time, and it was all linked up with Earth Day at the time. All these groups were together. And now was worked on consensus in the consciousness raising group, so I had some experience with that. Yeah. And it seems that nowadays a whole new generation is having to learn it and finding it quite difficult. And sometimes within the peace movement today, unfortunately, there's a lot of almost territoriality again, and it has to be learned again. And sure enough, Quakers are coming through with it again, and others are giving us civil disobedience training again. And you can never get enough of it because it changes, because now you've got your text messaging and you've got your cell phones, and it's very different now.
You mentioned Code Pink, that you are doing a lot of work with Code Pink. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we're groups of women. I guess we're international now. It was formed by Medea Benjamin and Jody Evans and Gail Murphy. Wonderful women that formed it just prior to 2003. And we go to hearings. In Washington, there's a Code Pink house, and women, and we sleep on futons and just everything we can. And there are women that have fasted for 25 days to get a meeting with a congressperson, because this person had just come back from Iran, and she had beautiful pictures of the people of Iran. And this particular congressman was very adamant in that we were going to need to go after Iran. And she fasted and fasted, and we would go into his office, and we would have a sit-in, and she would show the pictures of Iran, and we would ask her questions, much as you're doing me, and she would tell us about that. And one time, and then they had a sort of procedure, and then first the security people would come, and then the security people would give you some time, and then the police would come, and they would give you some time, and then they would escort you out. But once she was so weak that she collapsed in the office, and she had to be taken to the hospital, and we were photographing the whole thing, archiving it all, and the police did try to stop us from photographing it, but we had enough smarts to outsmart them there too. And she finally did get a meeting with this congressperson, and perhaps she softened his rhetoric just a bit. And now she's on another fast. Now it's a rolling fast, and those of us, we join her for maybe a day at a time or a weekend at a time, and register ourselves. And we have local chapters, and we had a teach-in our local congressperson's office, and he met with us. He changed his schedule, and he met with us, but just briefly. Then we went out into the lobby, and we had pink paper chains, and we told what we were chained to, and we have learned to have videographers there all the time. And we get on public access television, and sometimes we make Long Island news. And we do try to make it dramatic. Hot pink can be very, very dramatic, and we do that. We know how to attract the media, but we also are extremely prepared as far as our research about the legislation is concerned. And we do a lot of celebrating of peace, because if you can't have fun, if you can't do that, then don't bother. Don't bother. You don't take yourself so terribly seriously. And we do this because otherwise we would fall into despair, just plain despair. You've got to say, I did what I could, and then maybe a little some. And as soon as you think, oh, I can't do another thing, then you meet people that are fasting for 25 days. You meet people that are women that have gone into Iraq, that were there when we invaded, that were fighting the sanctions the whole time. Or Iraqi war vets that were raped, that were sent from platoon to platoon because they were called instigators, that were sent home disabled and got to live on $50 a week. And then I can do a little more. There's always a woman out there that's doing it all. Think of the raging grannies, think of the ones that get arrested because they tried to enlist, So, yeah. But Seneca was, for me, I think it was not the beginning, but it was really a highlight of my activism. And it's carried through all these years.
Were there any things at Seneca that, any skills that you picked up that you didn't have before?
Okay. Yeah, I think they put out a newsletter with some kind of communications, and I was told to, I learned to write more succinctly. The bullets, to do the flyers. I remember flyers. I remember learning a little bit more about how to do graphics, because the artwork there was fantastic. We'd paint on everything and anything. They'd banners and how to do a quick poster for the situation. A quick response is what I learned, a quicker response to what was actually happening.
Do you think that the stories of resistance from all of these activities are impressing young people today to continue to do resistance?
I'm afraid I think that the media and the culture has not allowed many of these stories of resistance to come to the fore. What Code Pink has found is that we have been working with the local universities. There's always a little peace group or a little environmental group that also embraces peace work. And once they see, for example, our ribbons, we have a ribbon for each of the 3,900, coming near 980 soldiers. And these ribbons have the name and age of each, and they're clotheslines that go from year to year. When you bring something like that to a university, and they're really, for the first time, sort of confronted by this, things change.
And these ribbons represent each person,
each soldier, each soldier that has died, killed in action, from the list that they give us. Some people say these lists are totally inadequate and not even true, but we have to use the lists that are given us. And so they're pink ribbons, and we use them in masses, in churches. We've marched in Memorial Day, on Memorial Day weekend, along the boardwalk in Jones Beach, 20 people carrying these single file in the midst of tanks and recruiters and air shows going on overhead, and then stopping to read the names of the dead, and including Iraqi names as well. And that kind of thing begins to pass the torch, So, and you asked me...
Hold on just a minute, I want to switch this audio tape.
Got it? Flip it.
Flip it for us, thanks.
You asked me to get the poem.
Yes, I had that written down, so I've made a note of. Make sure you read your poem. Small print. Maybe that bigger for you.
Okay.
So can you lean back?
As I said, I was very active in Now, and we had our own chapter. We called it the Alice Paul chapter, and we did get to see her once when she was in a nursing home before she passed away. And I know the film Iron-Jawed Angels is coming, and I look forward to seeing that. So this was our 15th anniversary celebration, and it was on April 9th, 1987. And part of this passing the torch of feminism, I had written a poem about my time at Seneca, and I called it Field Grass. perhaps this July evening, and each July time past, only the generations of fireflies whirling in their brief brilliance can bear true witness as the women gather at Seneca. 1590, and the women gather, tribal matriarchs of the Haudenosaunee of the Iroquois Confederation, demanding an end to war among their nations, voices chanting, ghosting upward from the field grass at Seneca. 1848, and the women gather in convention proclaiming, quote, that they may no longer publish their degradation by declaring themselves satisfied with their present condition, nor their ignorance by asserting that they have all the rights they want, unquote. Their eloquence explodes upwards from the field grass at Seneca. 1906, and the women gather, quote, resolved that it is the duty of the women of the country to secure themselves their sacred rights to elective franchise, unquote. Punctuating torches, pieces of the mother moon flare above the field grass at Seneca. 1983, and the women gather, repudiating the Seneca, which harbors now only the instruments of death and destruction, stabbing at the sun, shearing off the field grass at Seneca. 1983, and the women gather, their voices, bodies, wills, their incandescent spirits spiraling upwards from the field grass, pulsing shards of peace, instances of hope and power, aching to rejoin their mother moon, strive upwards, spiral upwards from the field grass as the fireflies and the women gather at Seneca.
Wow.
So that was written July 18th, 1983. And it pretty well says it for me, of the spirit that I felt there.
Can you talk about a little bit about spirituality at the encampment? Was that something that you experienced there?
Well, yeah, because things became spontaneous rituals. Rituals in which women celebrated themselves, their bodies, things that the society had kept hidden. And ritual, direct communication with Creator, Spirit, with the Force, with the Goddess. And the Goddess was always there at Seneca. And I think that really helped put me on the Goddess path, because I'm a very proud Wiccan, and I'm a very proud Goddess worshiper. And I can't say it started there, but it certainly got validated that women could gather in circles, that women could implore the goddess energy to come down, to work with them for peace, and to work with them to save Gaia. And that's been a very big thing in my life. And it was validated there, and I think I got more daring in the use of ritual after seeing what the women crafted out of nothing and made beautiful altars, made beautiful pieces right there, right then, in the presence. And you really felt the imminence, as Starhawk would say. And it harmed none. And the knowing that imminence is everything, that the divine is here and now, and that the wound of origin was that we were exiled from the garden. Therefore, we could trash where we were, and we have. I think Seneca showed me, the encampment showed me that we're still in the garden, and that women were making the garden, and they were tilling the garden, and it was very, very beautiful.
Can you speak about what spirituality brings to political action and what political action brings to spirituality? We often see separation in that in people, but you obviously have experience in the merging.
Well, when you see the beautiful women who have transcended, they have become, I hate to use the word saint-like, but they have become so pure, so clean. They are just conduits of the message of peace, etc. They bring such a spiritual presence to the work. I am constantly working toward that rejoining, because yes, in this patriarchal society, and believe me, that a lot of the peace movement is still patriarchal. Some of the men think that just because they're working for peace, that they are automatically feminist or not misogynist. Oh, I wish that were true, but it isn't. So, through the work of Starhawk, who does magical activism through reclaiming, I do belong to a reclaiming group here on Long Island, and as a matter of fact, we are having a meeting this coming Wednesday to start a pagan cluster, which will use magical activism, drumming, the living river idea, the flowing, the bringing down the spiral energy of the goddess into our actions. We are beginning to merge, and we're bringing people who are just new to the goddess path, to the pagan path. They are going to be exploring this magical activism, and it's very exciting because it is a new generation that's doing this. Of course, Starhawk has been doing this beautifully, and she's been my teacher since 1983. So, and I've been with her to Mexico, and I've been with her in many places where I remember in Mexico, we happened to be in the town that I had gotten married in many, many years ago, Tepoztlan, and we were at the Huehuecayotl, which was an old village, an eco-village that had been founded by an acting troupe from Europe. And Starhawk was there, and we were having a workshop. And we had a workshop with some youth gangs from Mexico City. And we were teaching them pacifism, civil disobedience, and they were teaching us. And it was just marvelous. These young these young Mexican men and women, and how they were transcending just the gangs, and they were becoming like the Black Panthers. What can I say? It was just a beautiful experience. And I remember there were male shaman there, and there were women that had come from all over Mexico that had been working with women. And I have to say, they looked at the male shaman, European-based that he was, and they were not ready to let go with him. So someone knew that I had been working with women who had been sexually abused as children, and these women had worked with such women, and so they asked me to do a workshop, and I did that, and somehow with a translator we did do some shamanic techniques, some goddess techniques that they could use with women who had been abused. and the indigenous people there was a cave, about a quarter of a mile above the valley where the houses were in, that they had made out of flowers a womb with ovaries, a gorgeous vagina, all of flowers in this cave. And the highlight of my workshop was we went up to this cave, and the women who had never done a shamanic journey before or anything like it, they lay down in the cave, and before I even started to rattle, they were gone. They were journeying, and it was a beautiful, beautiful journey, and they came back very much stronger and ready to do their work with some new skills. And I remember we went back down to the village, and the shaman apologized because he kept talking during the whole journey that he had done, and it wasn't a shamanic journey at all. And he said, "Well, I was afraid I would lose the group," and we just smiled, and we were very strong because we had journeyed, and they couldn't touch us anymore. In other words, we knew we were grounded, we were centered, we were with the goddess, and the rest was just gravy. The rest was just beauty. So the work from Seneca has just stayed with me the whole time, the whole time. Yeah, it's informed a lot of what I do, and I thank you so much for bringing it all back to consciousness, because it lays there, it's fallow earth, but it's nice to have it rototilled once in a while, brought back up. Thank you.
When you gave, you said when you all were arrested, you gave the same date as your birthday. Can you speak for folks that don't know that date, why
sure.
that was significant?
Well, we were there at the counter, and there were, again, a lot of young soldiers. And when you were being photographed, etc., they had this sheet on you, and when they said birth date, I said August 6th, 1945. And he wrote it down. I said, "Don't you know what that date is? Do I look like I was born in 1945? I guess if you're over 30, you all look old, so no, ma'am. I said, that was the date that we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, or now you call it Hiroshima. Oh. The next woman, August 6th, 1945, and then they started to get it. And they didn't complain. They just wrote it down because they started to see. Because again, after the singing, after the time in the sweltering heat of the pens, we too had sort of become transfigured. We had become a little bit more than we were before. A little bit clearer, a little bit cleaner, a little bit purer, if you will. But there was a shining, and it showed. And I remember my big black soldier. He was so gentle. He became so gentle. He saw my bandaged hand later. He had to accompany me everywhere until we were put into the pen. And I wonder, there were Polaroids taken of each soldier with their captor, with their captives. And I wonder if who kept that Polaroid, or if it's in my file. But as I always say, someday you're going to be judged on the thickness of your file.
You spoke about helicopters going overhead when you all camped at the state park.
Yes.
Did you ever camp at the land at Seneca that you recall?
Yeah, I had a little tent. Yeah, probably a day or two. Yeah. It was out in the back field there, and The right.
Amazon acres.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I had a little green tent, a little, and of course, being suburban, we had done. My husband and I had done some camping, but this was, this was me alone doing my thing alone. There was no big man to, to guard anybody or do anything. So, it felt good. It felt good. And I remember I came across from a woman's writing workshop, so I was all on fire about writing at the time. And we camped. And of course, as Now chapter, we visited Seneca to go to the museums and to do, the rest of it. But that was after. And it had become, because of the encampment, it had become very sanctified place. And Now chapters knew about the encampment, and it was part of the pride of Seneca Falls. And it seemed that the women's spirits, like my poem said, really was there. And I would imagine it's still there. I haven't been back, but I would imagine it's still there. Now to bring this to this new generation of women, of young women, that's going to be a mission. And I think you're on it, and I think you're going to accomplish it. I know you are. I'm not at all afraid of that. So,
I'm curious, were you ever arrested prior to the Seneca? Were you ever arrested?
Neither prior nor after. No, that was my one time to do that. I remember once at the Republican National Convention, we had a peace walk on Long Island from Montauk to the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. A relay. It took us 10 days. Okay, not everyone did all of the sketches of it. I was in charge of the Huntington part, and about 5 or 6 people were walking into Huntington, and we had arranged with Temple Bethel to give them supper, and because this was taking place during the day, most people couldn't do it. They were working. So we had the Piece of Cake walk. And from Temple Bethel to the Huntington Cinema, which is really the hub of most of the activities in this area that have to do with peace and justice, it was about a mile walk. And after dinner, we invited other people, townspeople, people to join us. They brought their kids, and we had a big march down to the cinema, and we had puppet shows, and we had other shows. And then the next morning, we had a breakfast at the cinema. We stopped at Town Hall and presented a peace petition, and we walked all the way up 110, which is a very, very busy road, north-south road, all the way to the Walt Whitman Mall, where we had a peace demonstration, and then people walked on to Pine Lawn Cemetery, and then all the way to Wyandanch to Our Lady of Miraculous Medal, which is a peace and justice church. And we did segments, and we walked all the way. Some of us walked 2 or 3 days and couldn't do the rest, and then we met at the Brooklyn Bridge, and we had real torches, 2 real torches with plaques on them, and I know I got to carry it part way on the Brooklyn Bridge, and that was the proudest moment, I think, of my life, when I carried that torch. And then we went to, of course, we joined the other protesters at the Republican National Convention, and on the 3rd day, and each day, Medea Benjamin got in one day, Gail Murphy got in another day, Jody Evans got in, because they looked so innocent. And, and men still just don't understand the power of women, I think. And then when they were in there, they'd open up and they'd have pink slips that say, "Bush, you lied, you're fired," or something else, and it was wonderful. And I was standing the third day when it was the unions were demonstrating, and I was with my AFT. I'm a retired school teacher, and I was standing back by Code Pinkberry, and Medea Benjamin had come by, and we greeted each other, and she left. And then this man dressed in black, with the black tie, the white shirt, the black sort of shiny suit. I didn't look to see if he was wearing white socks. But he said, "I'm John, and I'm with the Secret Service. Can you tell me why you're here?" And I said, "Don't you see? Look, this is the first time I've seen African Americans and Latinos coming out in force, wearing their union T-shirts to say, 'Stop the nonsense, stop the war.'" And he said, "Oh, what's your name?" And I said, "Charlotte." And he said, "Oh, I have an aunt named Charlotte." And I said, "Isn't that nice?" And he said, "Are you with Code Pink?" And I said, "Yes." And he started asking me questions. And I just happened to have in my bag an article that had been written about me in the local paper, which said, the headline of which was, "Messenger for the Power of Peaceful Change." And I said, "Here, dear, have this article. That's all you need to know about me." And he said, "Thank you, ma'am." And he left. So, sometimes flamboyance is the best disguise.
Well, it doesn't look like you're about to stop anytime soon.
Not until there's not as long as I've got a breath left in me. I'm very, very pleased with my life right now. It's a joy. I have a 3-line poem from Tagore. That's my philosophy in a very big nutshell. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and found that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. And that's by Tagore. So that's where it is. And I do try and combine. I was telling you the other day that I belong to 3 LIPCs. I belong to the Long Island Progressive Coalition, and they do some wonderful peace and justice work. I belong to the Long Island Poetry Collective, and I do ceremony with them on the solstice, and I do write. And then I belong to the Long Island Pagan Cluster, and we are going to be working on magical activism. Well, I just again would like to thank you and say how much I admire what you're doing and how necessary the work is, how necessary it is to archive, how necessary it is, because that's how the other side, and I hate to make that division, but that's how the misguided, the ones in lesser, that are not in the light, ignore and say and tell us that there is no peace movement, there is no peace and justice movement, and yet it's all over, it's all around, and yes, it is growing, and yes, the torch is being passed. Yes, we work. Code Pink works a lot with Veterans for Peace out here, and there are new chapters. And Camillo, who was one of the people who went to prison because he could not go back to Iraq the second time, we were at a meeting where he spoke and 2 other veterans spoke, Iraqi veterans spoke, and I have to say, he said that when he was when he was having his hearing, only the Code Pink women got through, and he said, "I don't know how they did it, but they unfurled a banner that says, 'Free Camillo!'"
What did it say?
"Free Camillo," in other words, we got through, and that's what's going to happen. We're getting through, and the vibrations, and I have to talk about that. I do believe that though there are people that are not in the streets, that are not at meetings, at your endless meetings, they are not at the peace parties, but there are people that are raising the vibrations of the planet in their own way. They do it through healing circles, they do it through meditation, they do it through seeing that there are other energies that can and will save the planet. And together, those of us on the streets and those of us that are doing it quietly with meditation, with ritual, solitarily, if there's such a word, together, all together, the planet's going to come. The energy is rising. It is rising. And though it may be a roller coaster to 2012, I do believe there is a new dawn. A new dawn. It's not the end of anything. It's just the beginning of something new. And I hope to be around to see it. And, you know, what we are, lest you lose hope, what we are, the biggest ocean liner, the biggest ship has a rudder. And in that rudder, as Buckminster Fuller always said, there's a little trim tab. It's called a trim tab. It's a little tiny rudder within the rudder. No, not much bigger than my hand. And before the ship, the big rudder is turned, this trim tab starts the turning. And we are the trim tab. And as Buckminster Fuller said, you and I are essential functions of universe. We are exquisite synthropy. I'll be seeing you forever.